It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Texas State Assistant Track and Field Coach, Coach Kendall Gustafson. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing today, Brandon?
I'm doing wonderful. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to get started in coaching?
It really wasn't any one thing. And honestly, after my professional career, I didn't think about it too much. The main thing that happened is Coach John Frazier, who's our head coach now, gave me a call and was like, "Hey, I think you'd be perfect for this." And him and I had a really good relationship going back, and it was more so that he was somebody that I really wanted to work with, and I always had a knack for coaching, and it was something that kind of just fell into place for me rather than me really going and seeking it out.
How's it like obviously going first to Duke and playing in the ACC and competing?
It was interesting. So I grew up in Los Angeles. So I went all the way across the country to go to school at Duke, and it was a little bit of a shock for me. I'll be honest. And looking back at it, really wasn't quite the right fit for me. I competed, or I'll say this, I ended up redshirting my entire freshman year because of some injuries. And then I came back my second year because I was like, maybe this would be a better experience if I, wasn't redshirting, if I was competing, if I was doing, a little bit more. And it still, for me, was just not a super positive experience, which is why I ultimately made the decision to transfer and kind of come back home to UCLA.
What was that like, obviously coming back home and getting to put on that blue UCLA jersey?
I mean, for me, it was awesome. I grew up a UCLA fan. Both of my parents went to UCLA. I think both of my grandparents on my dad's side went to UCLA. So it kind of ran in the family. I think initially out of high school, I wasn't super interested just because it was so close to home. It was like a little too close to home. But when as you said, the moment I put that jersey on, I was like, no, this is where I was supposed to be all along. And it just felt right. And I mean, it kind of went along with, the success that I had while I was at UCLA. Just everything felt comfortable for me there. And I really just felt at home the whole time.
What was that like, obviously getting to compete in the Pac-12 and obviously winning a championship during that time?
Competing, I really enjoyed the Pac-12. It was nice. I mean, we got to go to almost every school that was there along the West Coast. There's some beautiful schools. I mean, during some of the Pac-12 championships, we went to Washington and we did a couple at University of Oregon, which is, obviously like one of the greatest. At the time, for when I was competing, it was still the old Hayward Field. But it was cool to go there for just, a Pac-12 championships. And there was some awesome competition. I mean, it was a great way to kind of compete throughout college. I really enjoyed.
How was that like, obviously, getting your first coaching job at your alma mater of UCLA?
It was good. So right when I got out, so I graduated in 2018 and immediately kind of rolled right into my volunteer assistant coaching there. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was still training professionally. And so it made sense for me. I would train there in the mornings with my coach, and then I would help with the team in the afternoons, and then I would travel to as many meets as I could. And it was really fun because I was still connected to the team. And it was actually a really easy transition because they were really, at first I was a little concerned that it was going to be like, these were my teammates and now I'm trying to coach them and they wouldn't take that, the right way. And, but that wasn't the case at all. They all really respected me and everything I had done and listened. And it was really, really fun to then still be a part of my teammates' success even after I graduated. It was a really fun time.
How was that balance? Like, as you said, during your time at UCLA coaching, you were also a track and field athlete for US.
Yeah, so that was very challenging. I think, so my days were often very, very long. I would usually do my own training in the morning, 3 hours earlier in the day. And then in the afternoons, I would help coach, at UCLA, their practices. And then a lot of the times in the evening, I would do private coaching as well, because obviously as a volunteer coach, I wasn't being paid. And so I needed a way to make money as well. There are some days where I would spend 10 plus hours on the track and it was really exhausting. But it ended up it was like a very rewarding, fun time, but it was, looking back on it, completely exhausting and something that I knew I couldn't maintain for a long period of time. And so that was my first year, 2019, where I did that all year. And it was a really good, successful year, but I knew going into 2020 that I was going to need to make an adjustment. And so I kind of backed off a little bit with the coaching that I did at UCLA, just because it took a lot of my energy, even though I loved it. It just wasn't possible to maintain an equal balance of essentially full-time coaching and also full-time training for the heptathlon, which is so many events. I was very tired.
Of course, how was that like, obviously owning your own business, the Leapfrog Sports?
Oh, that was fun. So that was the private coaching that I talked about. It was a really fun experience, kind of getting more time with younger athletes, because I couldn't, as a volunteer assistant coach, I couldn't spend time with like high school age because they're considered recruiting age. So I would do a lot of younger kids and spend time with them. And so they would meet me out on the track, later after UCLA's practice was done. It was fun kind of getting to introduce kids to the sport of track and teach them all kinds of events. And it was also fun. It was fun running my own business. And I learned a lot from that because go through everything that it takes to start up a small business. I even, hired another coach at one point. And so I was working with them as well. And it was a good learning experience for me. But I knew also that at that point that it wasn't really going to be sustainable, in the sense of, like I said, the training and the coaching for the university and that business. It was just a lot to do. But again, it was really fun.
How did, obviously, your business Leapfrog Sports help you to get your first paid coaching job at Rice?
So that was actually still a volunteer job. So the transition from UCLA to Rice would actually happen because during COVID, UCLA shut down completely. And that stopped my training. It stopped my private coaching. Obviously, the UCLA team stopped competing. So everything just kind of shut down. At that point, I was qualified for the Olympic trials and knew that I couldn't quite just stop my whole career yet while I still had a qualifying mark. And so I had to figure out a different way to make it work. My boyfriend went to Rice and was training in Houston and basically told me that, you know, hey, we're open over here. If you want to continue your training, we can do it over here and we can make it work. And so that was the reason that I moved from LA to Houston, was to continue my own training during the pandemic. And then once I got there, the coaching staff was awesome and kind of welcomed me with open arms. But I entered a role there of, first it was like volunteer coach, but it ended up being more of a volunteer director of ops position, where I did a lot of office work for them and kind of gave back to the program however I could while I was still there training for Olympic trials.
How did that experience at Rice help you to get your first paid coaching job at Texas State?
I would say that it gave me kind of a look into a different program that wasn't just UCLA. I had spent, my time at UCLA as an athlete and then as a volunteer, and it was just, that was kind of what I knew. And then when I got to Rice, it showed me, one, it was in a different state. So I got to see a lot of different teams, and they competed against some schools that I wasn't used to seeing, including Texas State. And then it just gave me a different view of how things were run, and really helped just give me a little bit more of a holistic view of everything that being a college coach entails, instead of just kind of the small lane that I stayed in while I was at UCLA.
Of course, how is it like, obviously, working with the jumpers and the multis?
At Texas State now,
Mm-hmm.
It's great. I love it. So I hopped into this position last year, and obviously the multi-events is what I always did. And so I'm very comfortable there. And then I high jumped and long jumped as part of the heptathlon. So I'm very comfortable there. But then there's also the triple jump and the pole vault, which are some events that I didn't have as much experience in. So I really had to kind of beef up my knowledge and talked with a lot of people, did a lot of research, and then obviously just using my experience and training from other events to kind of build my confidence in coaching those events. And it's been, last year was just my first year, but it was a really successful year. All of the triple jumpers that, in an event where I wasn't as confident going into it, everybody PR'd, and it was a very successful year. In pole vault, we have a separate pole vault coach that helps with their technical work. So that was very helpful. I do all of their training on the track, but she helps with their technical work. And it was another it's a really good setup that we have. And I really enjoy it. And I have a really, really good group of athletes, which makes my life easy.
Of course, how has it been like taking your professional experience over to your coaching experience?
I would say as of right now, I'm still a young coach, and that's mostly what I lean on, is because I don't have as many years of coaching experience. And I think as you go on as a coach, you gain more and more experience, you learn new things, and that's kind of how you end up coaching your athletes. But because I don't have so much of that yet, I lean very heavily on my own personal experience. I competed in track for, 14 plus years. So, and because I did so many events, it gave me a very wide knowledge base. And so I lean on my experience, not only in the the technical aspect of knowing each event based off of how I did it, but also mentally how I approached meets. I kind of am constantly relaying to my athletes things that worked for me and things that I did based off of my personal experience. Obviously, the one drawback with that is all of these other athletes are not me, and so they handle things differently than I do. But last year they responded really well to everything that I told them and I talked about, and they seem to really, I'll say this, the lack of experience that I have coaching doesn't seem to matter to them. They really respect me because of the things that I accomplished personally on the track. And so that makes up for it completely.
Of course, who are some of the teams that you faced in your conference?
In our conference, I'll say some of the main schools that we were competing against was Arkansas State. Last year, UT Arlington was one of the people we competed against, but they just left the conference. And then I'm trying to think of a couple others: Louisiana, Monroe, Coastal Carolina. It's a big conference now. I think they have 14 because there were 4 new schools that entered this year. I know Southern Miss is coming into our conference this year. But the Sun Belt Conference is interesting because I obviously spent most of my time with the exception of Rice last year, but I spent most of my time as an athlete in Power 5 conferences, both in the ACC and the Pac-12. And it's been really interesting to me to spend some more time in some of the smaller conferences and realize just how competitive they really are. And maybe it's not as deep in some of the performances, but at the top, it's very, very competitive. And we have to work really hard against some of these schools to do well, but we're in a really good position at Texas State to continue to do really well in our conference.
Of course, as a coach, what is it like obviously traveling back to the North Carolinas to get to play those teams like Coastal Carolina and Appalachian?
So last year we didn't go to we didn't make it to North Carolina. We tried to spend as much of our time in Texas as possible because there's so much competition here. But I know that our outdoor conference meet is at Coastal Carolina next year, so we'll be in Myrtle Beach for that. But I've been back to North Carolina a bunch of times, and it's been good. But it's fun to be able to see a lot of new states and a lot of new areas and kind of travel to places that I haven't been before, because same thing, before I was kind of on the coast, been on the East Coast, I've been on the West Coast, and now we're kind of Sun Belt Conference, we're down in the South. And last year I was went to a couple new states. I hadn't been to Arkansas before, hadn't been to Louisiana before. We spent a lot of time in Louisiana now. And I hadn't been to Alabama before. And so I'm now covering the South a lot and spending a lot of time there. And it's really fun to kind of go and explore. Track has taken me all kinds of fun places, including the majority of the 50 states. So it's been fun.
Of course, what is your coaching routine and rituals like?
I would say it changes constantly. It depends on the athletes that I have, of course, and kind of what they respond to. I'm basically plan a week at a time. So I plan how I want a week to go for various event groups. So I'll do, my multi-eventals will have 1 week plan. My high jumpers will have another. My horizontal jumpers will have another. So there's a lot of planning involved. But what happens is I plan something and it constantly gets blown up because of whatever reason. People have injuries, people are sick, people need to adjust things for class, people have to do all kinds of things. So I think the main thing that I have to do is just be flexible and kind of make decisions on the fly and make adjustments, and am constantly pivoting and making different decisions. So I just have to trust myself and the knowledge that I do have, and know that I'm making the best decisions for my athletes constantly. So there's not a lot of, I'll say, rituals that go into it, because it's an ever-changing situation.
Of course, what does the recruitment process look like for those prospective student athletes looking to come to Texas State?
Um, I would say that, I mean, right now, our team is very much up and coming. So we're getting more and more, I'll say, competitive in the athletes that we're looking for. But some of the advice that I would give to those younger athletes is make yourself known in the sense of reach out, right? I think that's something that a lot of people don't do is they just kind of sit back and wait for people to contact them. But even if you are the best, there are, so many other athletes out there that we're constantly looking at, and there's so much going on that it is helpful if you're interested in somewhere to reach out, either email or a lot of the times coaches' phone numbers are on their website and you can go and find it. Also, I don't like saying this, but social media is a huge way that we recruit these days. And so having, making sure you have a decently accessible Instagram and Twitter is some of the ways that, I'll see a name and I'll immediately look them up on Instagram or Twitter. And that's kind of sometimes the first way I reach out and contact people. So if you're checking your Instagram, you're checking your Twitter, you have your transcripts ready. It makes my life so much easier. And then when I talk to you and you have these things ready, it leaves a really good impression on me if you're prepared and ready to go. And so it makes it really helpful and makes me want, if I already wanted an athlete because of their marks, it makes me want them even more, knowing that they're making my life easier and kind of know what I'm looking for.
Of course, when obviously looking at athletes, how important is it, obviously, with Texas being so big? What is it like, obviously, recruiting out of Texas?
It's been easy because we are obviously a Texas state school. We're a public institution, and we have our in-state and out-of-state tuition and all of that. And so I heavily prefer Texas athletes, and that's the first place I look when I am recruiting is I'm going to look at the state of Texas. And because it is so big and because there is so much talent in most of my events, I don't really need to go beyond that. I'm looking in Texas. I want Texas kids. There's a couple of events where it's not going to be as deep, including, the multi events, for instance. There's not going to be enough true, heptathletes or decathletes that come out of high school. That's in general. That's not just in Texas. But so from there, I'll have to look beyond, or sometimes there's a special talent that comes out of a different state in other events. But the pool that I have to work with in Texas is so big and so talented. I feel very lucky that recruiting wise, I don't need to travel super far, even though Texas is a massive state and it does take a while to travel around it. I don't need to travel so far. And it's easy. I go to the state meet results and you look down the list and there's everybody in my backyard and they're right there, and it's easy for me to contact them. So as a coach, as a college track coach, being in Texas is really the best place I could possibly be.
Of course, what advice would you give those prospective student athletes that are in high school looking to become college track players?
Kind of going back to what I said before is definitely making yourself known and accessible. There have been a few instances where I've seen a name and have tried to reach out in various different ways, and it's kind of difficult. And with social media these days, it is so easy to reach so many people that if you're not on there, it can get a little bit frustrating as a coach when you're like, man, I can't find this person. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop or give up, but it's easy when I can easily reach out to someone. And then when someone is responsive as well, and also just keeping your stats up to date, making sure that you have marks and everything, making sure you have your transcripts available, all of that stuff. That's kind of more on the logistical side of it. When it comes to training, just keep working, right? The whole thing is, even if you feel like, no matter how good you are, if you want to run in college, you probably can. It's just a matter of what level, you want to get to. And so I think my advice is just to continue to work and work and work, whether that's, in the off season on technical work for, a jumping or a throwing event, or, just going to, get into the track and continuing to run and work on your speed, or whatever it is. The work that you do in the off season will absolutely make a difference during the track season. And then, yeah, be very forward with coaches. Don't shy away. If there's a school that you want to go to, I'm not going to say too much. I would say bug them, let them know, send them updates. If you get turned away, from some schools, maybe there's a level that is right for you. And so don't, like, necessarily, if you have a goal of, competing at a top university but it's just not quite realistic, don't be afraid to, look at some of those smaller schools, some of those smaller names, because that could honestly be the best fit for you.
What advice would you give those college athletes that are looking to compete professionally for Team USA?
That's a little bit more of a loaded question, because that's a really, I'll say, being a post-collegiate athlete is a very difficult experience, unless you're one of the very top few that easily gets picked up by a sponsor. Because out of college, I think a lot of people don't realize how much support they do have in college, between your athletic trainers and paying for all of your travel and expenses and all of that stuff. So when you get out of college, there's, again, unless you have a sponsor, there's not necessarily anyone to support you except for yourself. So you need to be prepared financially, and what that's going to look like, if you have someone helping you, or if you have, make sure you have a job to, help support. So initially, it's not a very glamorous or pretty lifestyle. It's all about just figuring out a way to make it work. And the other thing is finding a training situation where you're happy. I think a lot of people just really want to go, to keep training, and they get into a situation where they're just struggling, or they find a new coach because they think they should. And when oftentimes the best situation you can do is try to change as little as possible from college and just try to make things work, kind of how they were. But it is difficult, because I think we rely so heavily on the college system to support our professional athletes, or our post-collegiate athletes, really. And there's not really a good system that's set in place to support people who are kind of that in-between level, which I would say where I was. Every year I competed, I was top 10 in the US, but it was only those top 2 or 3 that were actually getting a lot of money. And so it was that difficult decision of, do I keep doing this? Do I keep spending this money? Do I keep kind of pushing off getting a full-time job to follow, at the time was, a passion? And the answer was yes, but only for so long, because it really is a kind of a difficult road.
What advice would you give those college coaches looking to get started, and even former professional athletes such as yourself that is getting into college coaching?
I found it to be honestly a pretty easy transition, because once I was done competing, I think a lot of people struggle with no longer competing and then moving on with the rest of their life. And what coaching does is, my life didn't actually change that much. I'm still out on the track every day. I'm still probably more heavily involved in the sport than I ever was before. And I still, in a way, even though I'm not the one out there doing it, I'm still competing, right? I'm living through my athletes vicariously, and I'm still getting that adrenaline pump and the highs and the lows that come with competition. So I feel in a way like I'm still competing, and it's a pretty easy transition. But for people, that are that are competing that know they want to go into coaching. I think the main thing that happened for me is it was just a past relationship that led into a job. And so I think it's all about forming and then maintaining positive relationships, not in the sense where you're, constantly seeking people that you think are going to help you in your future, but just genuine relationships, and not necessarily, going out of your way to, say hello and be friendly to people and exchanging ideas and letting people know that like who you are as a person, just besides who you are as an athlete, because that's ultimately what coaching is, what type of person you are rather than just how good you are at a specific event.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media along with the Texas State?
You said, where can you find me?
Mm-hmm.
So I have my Instagram and my Twitter are both Coach K Texas State, TXST, I believe at the end. And then the Texas State Instagram is, I want to say Texas State Cross Exceed Track and Field. And then their Twitter is Texas State Track and Field. So there's both. I have both an Instagram and a Twitter, and Texas State does as well.
Thank you again, Coach Kendall Gustafson, for your interview, and best of luck in your future at Texas State as the assistant track and field coach.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandon.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Coach Kendall, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
Thank you.